There, right by your mouth.
Okay, is that okay? Right, hello everybody, my name is Sarah Waters. I'm here I never thought I would ever in my life be here today speaking about this subject, to be honest with you. I'm absolutely shocked and horrified as to what is going on at the moment, especially with regards to what's happening to our children. It's absolutely disgusting. I'm horrified. I'm a psychotherapist and I specialise in working with trauma and abuse and attachment with children and adults. So I retrained about 20 years ago. And I've worked in the field of domestic abuse, and I've felt really happy about what's happened over the last 10 years, as it's really felt like trauma and mental health has been really high up on the agenda for children. But it seems like all of that's just completely gone out of the window now. I've sort of worked in the field of there's been a whole training sort of programme over the last 10 years around training up a whole army, apparently, of trauma-informed professionals and organisations, because science over the last 10 years has sort of caught up with what everybody's really known about, that trauma and abuse and neglect and all those sorts of things have a massive effect on children. So a trauma-informed army has been trained over the last 10 years to recognise abuse, and they've worked in, there's people who've trained, they're in schools, they're in the police force, they're in Cornwall Council, all over any sort of organisation that works with children, there is people in there who've done trauma-informed training. But my question is, where are they all? Where's their voice? Nobody is speaking up for the children. I'm about one of, not to blow my own trumpet, but I mean I think there's a handful of us in the country that are speaking out. And I don't know about you, but I'm totally confused and shocked that this is being allowed to happen to our children, and none of these professionals who have done, some of them have done a couple of days training, some of them have done years of training around child abuse, child neglect, child trauma, and none of them are speaking out about what's happening to our children. So I suppose all of us have been asking that question, and I have from a psychological point of view. What has happened to all these people? Why are they not recognising what's going on? I mean, a part of it, I think, is, as we all know, there's been a massive psychological fear campaign from our government. They've got a psychological team called SPI-B, a big department that works with the government, which is manned by psychologists, whose job is to create fear, basically, in our society, to make us all adhere to these ridiculous rules and regulations that have been happening. But why are these trauma-informed practitioners not standing up and saying that they don't agree with what's happening? Because all of these restrictions and rules, particularly around our children, are absolutely the opposite as to what trauma-informed practice is about. And until people start speaking up, then nothing's going to change. So it's just not being recognised at all. Our children and our young people are being abandoned by those in our society that are meant to be standing up for them and have had the training to recognise that all these rules and regulations and restrictions are traumatising for our kids. In my book, adults are meant to protect children, not the other way round.
Yeah!
As far as I can see, all our children and young people are being used to protect adults. And I don't know if anybody knows, I've heard about, the UN Convention for Children states that all children should be protected by adults, and this is just not happening. So I, for one, am speaking out about it, and I think anybody else that's working in any profession that is involved with children really needs to try and get their voice heard. I particularly have been really worried about the vulnerable children in particular. My heart absolutely sank during the first lockdown. So I was thinking, what is happening to all these vulnerable children? It's all well and good for the kids who are in households children's mental health and what's been going on. I think domestic abuse rates have got higher. Our kids' mental health is deteriorating. I mean, it was pretty bad to start off with, really. Although I had been feeling over the last sort of 10 and 20 years of my career that was starting to change, and that children's mental health and their safety was being recognised. But in the midst of this COVID pandemic, all of that has completely and utterly gone out of the window, and our children are suffering, and I, for one, am not going to stand by and let that happen. I mean, face masks, social distancing, testing healthy children. I mean, what is all of that about? I mean, I was hoping when they went back to school after the first lockdown, they'd be going into a nice, secure environment and be nurtured and looked after. But no, they've gone back into schools and they've been segregated. They've been made to wear masks. They're setting up behaviour hubs for kids that aren't adhering to the rules. It's all a completely opposite to what everybody has been trained and taught about trauma over the last 10 years. Where is this army of trauma-informed practitioners? I would really encourage any of you that can speak to, any teachers, anybody that works for anything to do with children, and I would challenge them about it, because basically there's nothing that they can say. I've been on this mission for over a year now. I've been sending out emails to Cornwall Council, to all the children's charities. I mean, there's a charity in Truro, they're called Clear. I worked for them for 4 years. Children linked to and experiencing abusive relationships. They now have rebranded themselves and called them a trauma expert charity. None of them, not one person, says anything. None of them reply to any of my emails, because none of them have got a leg to stand on, because they know that what is happening is wrong. The only thing that I can think of is this psychological fear campaign that the government is inflicting upon us, which the ethics of that is totally unbelievable, that they use psychologists to put fear into the citizens of this country to make them adhere to all these rules and regulations is completely and utterly unethical and unacceptable.
Exactly.
So I'm here today to just sort of highlight this, really. I don't know, maybe a lot of these professionals are stuck in fear themselves. We all know that if you're in a fear state, your brain sort of goes into its sort of ancient reptilian sort of mode, and it's all, you just want to keep yourself safe and you're in fight or flight mode. But that's just not acceptable when it's children that are suffering. These adults need to be protecting them. And my question is, why is that not happening? I wake up every morning in shock and horror at the profession that I am working in. Like I said, hardly anybody is speaking out. And how is this allowed to happen? I mean, the press won't report anything about it either. So we're in this really difficult situation.
Money. They've been bought.
They've been bought. Okay, so yeah, some of them they're scared for their jobs, but I'm sorry, that just really isn't good enough as far as I'm concerned. I'm putting my job on the line. To be honest with you, my job hasn't been affected. I'm lucky because I'm self-employed, but I'm carrying on working. I mean, I work with adults who have suffered trauma and abuse and neglect as children, and I deal with their difficulties day in, day out. And if I ever hear anybody say that children are resilient again, I'm going to fucking throw up. Because children are not resilient. Children are adaptive. What happens is children adapt to the situation that they're in. And that doesn't mean that they're resilient. What they have to do, if a child's in an abusive household, they have to adapt themselves to live in that household. Their nervous system is on fight or flight all the time because they have to be like that to live in that environment. It doesn't mean to say that they're resilient. And the problem is, the longer that it goes on for, these children's nervous systems are going to be set on fear mode, and they're not going to be able to get out of it, because our bodies are amazing, our nervous system is amazing, it adapts to situations, and that is what's going to happen. If this doesn't stop soon, we're going to have a whole generation of children who are going to have even more mental health problems than what's going on at the moment. I mean, I hear stories every day about there's increases in eating disorders, increases in health anxiety, what a surprise, OCD, depression, anxiety. I mean, the industry couldn't sort of cope with all of that anyway. There wasn't enough people and mental health experts to look after children's problems and mental health difficulties before this COVID situation started. So goodness knows what's happening now. Where's the funding from the government for mental health? That's what I'd like to know. They've spent billions and billions and billions on, this COVID, trying to protect people from the physical aspects of COVID. What about people's mental health? I think, as you probably all know, mental health affects physical health. They're not separate at all. They're inextricably linked with each other. So that would be another question, is where is the government's funding towards mental health? Do they want everybody to be in a state of anxiety and fear all the time? Yes, I think they do. Obviously, they do. Another aspect that I'm really concerned about and completely shocked about is the way pregnant women and babies are being affected. Pregnant women been going into hospital and giving birth to babies without their partners being there. And even being made to wear face masks when they're giving birth. I mean, what the fuck is that about? It's absolutely disgusting.
Criminal.
And these mothers might not be able to bond with their babies, and that can have lifelong effects, as we all know. And another area as well is wearing face masks around babies. I bet if you walk around Truro today, I bet you could count probably on, I don't know how many new parents you would see. They probably don't realise what they're doing, wearing face masks around their little babies. Babies need faces, that's, clear, they need to see their parents' faces and the rest of the people that are around them to feel safe and to work out where they are, what's going on, and where, being faced with a whole sea of people wearing face masks for a baby is really, really distressing. And again, anybody that knows anything about trauma-informed practice, of which there is an army of them out there in our society, knows that this is wrong.
You're saving the children.
People die.
Yeah. I mean, the other aspect that I'm really worried about is the whole sort of like peer pressure thing. I mean, I'm a mother as well as a psychotherapist. I've got a 12-year-old daughter at secondary school. She's found it really, really difficult because she doesn't want to wear face masks. She knows that we don't do as a family, but she's wanting to do it. Because all all teenagers want to do is fit in with their peers. And I think what we are facing here, it's a psychological war. The government know exactly what they are doing. They know how human beings work. Humans have got a herd mentality, basically. They like to fit in with the crowd. It's part of a safety mechanism, and they'll almost do anything to do that. They want to fit in with the crowd because that makes them feel safe, and the government knows that, and that is why they're doing what they're doing. So there's multiple sort of aspects here of very worrying things with regards to our children and young people. And what's happened is all these so-called trauma-informed professionals and all the people that I've looked up to during my career who've got years more experience than I have in child development and child trauma are all going along with it. And other groups have had to set up very quickly. They're all run by volunteers, they're all parents and concerned citizens. You might have heard of Us For Them, who are campaigning a lot about what's happening in our schools. We've got Future Z, who are campaigning around the experimental injection to try and encourage young people to wait. Then we've also got Heart, the Health Advisory Recovery Team. They're campaigning as well, but it's where are all the professionals that are paid? They are paid to look after our children. They're paid, and it is their job, and they are not saying anything at all. And that sort of I mean, obviously we've got the masking, you've got the testing, you've got the segregation. If somebody had come to me 2 years ago, a family, I mean, I work with adults, but I also work with adoptive families who adopt children that have been taken away from abusive and neglected families. If somebody had come to my therapy room 2 years ago and brought their child along, and their child was wearing a face mask, they told me that that child was being kept at home, wasn't being allowed to go outside and play or see their friends or their grandparents, and that they were testing that healthy child for an illness that they hadn't got. I would have been on the phone to social services the next day, and they would have been round there wanting to know what's happened. Because that's actually called, I don't know if you've heard, it's called Munchausen's by proxy.
Hi guys.
They would have been prosecuted and investigated for emotional and physical abuse. And this is happening on a mass scale to all our children. And it's so worrying, and I'm absolutely disgusted with my profession, to be honest with you. And I would really encourage anybody, like I said before, we need to talk to teachers, we need to talk to anybody that's working with children and bring this up with them. Because I think what's happening is this psychological campaign, basically they know that people don't like to speak up. I don't like speaking up. I can't believe I'm doing this today. I've got a fear of public speaking. But I think we've all got to do it, and I think once people start speaking up and putting doubt in people's minds, it will give them the licence for them to start doing it. But until this starts to happen on a bigger scale, then nothing's going to change. And I think we're probably all here really as well, because we can see that this bus is heading towards our children with regards to this experimental vaccine. And I don't know what I mean. The 16 and 17-year-olds are being encouraged to do it now, aren't they? And again, the bribery that is being used to get these kids to have this experimental injection is absolutely shocking. Informed consent is the cornerstone of medical practice. How can these young people make an informed decision about what they're doing? They can't, because they're not being given the information. And I heard at the weekend after the Boardmasters Festival, one of the nurses was boasting on her private Facebook page about how her and her team outside the Boardmasters Festival had injected nearly 300 young people. How disgusting is that? They cannot be allowed to get away with it. I've been at festivals, I've been at parties. I wouldn't be able to sign my name after leaving them, let alone actually consent to having an experimental medical procedure after leaving a festival. I cannot believe the depths that this country has sunk to, and the fact that nobody in my profession, I keep saying it, is standing up and saying anything. And the last thing that I want to say is I read this really interesting article a week or so ago. A guy in Canada wrote it about the psychological campaign of what's going on here, and he used the analogy of Hans Christian Andersen's fable from 1847, The Emperor Has No Clothes.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know whether any of you remember it, but basically it took a young child to be the one to stand up and say, the Emperor's not wearing any clothes. Because a child, they didn't have the self-consciousness to worry too much about what everybody else was going to say. And I really encourage anybody that hears today who's working in a profession and is not speaking out, please, please, you have to do it. Apparently it only takes like 10% of the population to speak out, and then behaviour can start changing. But I think there is 10% of people that know what's going on, but maybe there isn't 10% of people who are working in the NHS, in schools, in these children's charities that are speaking out. So I would really encourage you to do that, please. Thank you.